Projections and State Data Center unit. So I will provide a brief overview of the Projections and State Data Center. Some of the principal sources we rely on when reviewing the demographics or population characteristics section of a comprehensive plan and end with how we develop population projections. Now, the Projections and State Data Center is a member of the Census Bureau's State Data Center network. The purpose of state data centers is to make census products accessible and available to local communities. State data centers, including the Maryland State Data Center, customize census data for their state, counties, places, and other sub-county geographies. There are nearly 100 data sets available at the Maryland State Data Center website. These data sets come in large part from federal statistical sources. Next slide, please. So this is the State Data Center's landing page. There is a blue ribbon right above the main content. Each tab shows the data available. If you click on any tab you can click on any tab for related data sets. The Census Data tab, for example, includes detailed information from the 2010 census and summary information for prior censuses. Below the blue ribbon on the left-hand content page, there is contact information and links to the more popular items on our site: the Maryland Statistical Handbook, Population Estimates, and the American Community Survey, simply known as the ACS. These data sets are updated annually. We also announce data updates on our right-hand content page. Next slide, please. So our go-to sources to verify population stats are the census, the decennial census, population estimates, and the ACS. Each source covers specified geographies and is based on a unique methodology. Generally, for years following the release of the census, the intercensal years, 2011 to 2019, we recommend using the population estimates to get a count of the resident population. At the state and county geography, the population estimates are broken down by age, sex, and race. Now, these data are actually available on our website under the Estimates tab. The ACS is a survey and comes with a margin of error. ACS population numbers are weighted to the population estimates, so you can actually have a discussion or a presentation with both population estimates and ACS. To get population counts for smaller geographies, use the American Community Survey. For populations under 65,000, you would use the 5-year estimates as opposed to the 1-year estimates. The census explains that the difference between the ACS 1-year and the ACS 5-year estimates are like the difference between currency and precision. So we would recommend using the 5-year whenever possible. We also suggest, in summary, we suggest whenever possible to use the Population Estimates Program or the population estimates for total population, population by race, population by sex, and use the ACS for socioeconomic characteristics. For example, questions about employment status, educational attainment, income, mortgage, etc. When state data center staff create tables, charts, and maps, we realize it is important to properly cite the source for our information. Proper sourcing and detailed citation is necessary for purposes of review and verification, so we encourage the same. We update statistics annually and use the most recent statistics available in our reports and presentations. While the decennial census is an enumeration of every person living in the country, it is a snapshot in time. And with the passage of time, that snapshot changes. So when you're doing a comprehensive plan, it is a very long process. So obviously you cannot use the most recent population data every time. But using data that's 5 years old or 10 years old isn't really helpful. because obviously the snapshot has changed. So even if it's an update of a comprehensive plan or an amendment, it is important to consider updating those demographic statistics. Next slide, please. This is our most recent population projection for the state of Maryland. Our base is 2020, and we project over a 35-year horizon. In 2010, the population was 5.77 million. We projected that in 2020, it would have been 6.075 million, and by 2045, there will be 6.87 million. Now, of course, if anyone has seen the apportionment numbers that came out from the Census Bureau for 2020, our projection was actually off. But I'll get back to the issue of population projections and revisions later on. The census and PEP actually provide the base for our population projections. So that 2010 number actually comes from the 2010 decennial census. Excuse me. That was telling me I was at my time limit, or rather a midpoint. The census and PEP provides the base for our population projections. We'll be recalibrating our model to a 2020 base year. Next slide, please. The department's authority to produce population projections is written in statute. We update projections every 3 years and make annual projections or annual revisions to our projections as necessary. We use a cohort component model. The input data for the model comes from the Department of Health, Birth, and Death Statistics. And then migration, which is a residual. So so we have 2010 population, we get birth and death data, and then the residual is migration. These data are then converted into fertility rates, survival rates, and migration rates. Our projections are bottom-up. We produce population projections for each of the 24 jurisdictions and then add up for the regional projections and the state projection. In the case of jurisdictions in the suburban Washington region and for jurisdictions in the Baltimore region, we consult with the respective MPOs. So when we produce projections for Montgomery County, Frederick County, and Prince George's County, we consult with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, and quite often the state data center's population projections are in alignment with or within a range of the MPOs. For those jurisdictions that do not produce their own forecast, we actually offer our projections for them to use. Next slide, please. Now, there are different types of projection techniques and projection models, and as I mentioned, we use what is called a cohort component model. And as I said before, the cohort component model is driven by births, deaths, and migration, and we convert those into rates. Linear models are probably the most basic type of projection. They are based on historical data. Now, if you do a linear projection, a simple linear projection, you can go back 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years, get an average growth rate, and make the assumption that your population is going to grow at that same rate into the future. You can also develop a little more advanced linear model using regression techniques. Again, you're using historical data, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, with population growth, and you're getting a goodness of fit number. And once you get that goodness of fit, you're going to use that to project into the future. The housing unit method is something many of you are familiar with, because that is what many county planning departments use. Whether the data comes either from building permits or from plan information. So you know about the number of developments, the number of housing units in that development. You get the average housing size multiply those two numbers to get your population, and you're able to project that into the future. More advanced models are econometric models. These are models that usually you'll go to a consultant or you would purchase them through a subscription service. Econometric models are very expensive. So the big thing about any of these models is that whichever model you use is dictated to a large extent by data availability and accessibility, your budget, and also institutional knowledge. This is what we've done for X number of years, and this is what the community is used to looking at when they look at our numbers, because any model you use will give you different numbers. But you can tweak them to come close to what you need them to be. Next slide, please. So as I said, we use a cohort component model. Through our model, we do population projections, total population, household projections, average household size projections, housing unit projections, and labor force projections. We use a different model to project employment and income. Aside from these demographic characteristics, we also use a completely different model to project school enrollment. Next slide, please. So as I said at the earlier, when we did we released our projections, our December 2020 revision, and we were off on the 2020 number. And we do projections, we update our projections every 3 years and do annual revisions. And why do you do these revisions? Well, when you're developing a projection or forecast, it requires an iterative process, a process that begins with assumptions about the economy, assumptions about the community, assumptions about development. You take those assumptions and calibrate your model, whatever model you're using, because a model is just, a empty box. Then you input data, you'll get results. Well, you have to test those results, reassess what you've seen, and go back to the beginning if those results don't meet, quote unquote, the smell test. Once we are satisfied, or you are satisfied with the results and whatever internal process you go through to say, hey, these results make sense, you need to do an analysis, and then you have to look at implications. Now, the Maryland State Data Center, when we develop our projections, we go through each of the steps, but we're really not looking at implications in the sense of, population growth drives demand. It drives demand for services, for infrastructure, for roads, for sewer capacity, for schools. And all this has implications to a budget and to other ramifications. We don't look at that end of it. We're more concerned with, are the results in line with what we have seen in the past? And of course, what's important is what we do as a state data center when we develop projections is we take those projections to local communities, to local counties, to local municipalities and say, this is what we've done. How do they look to you? Because the county has to assess and be concerned with the implications of those numbers. Next slide, please. So these are some of the data sources that would be helpful when you're doing projections. Many of these are available on our website. We have them on the right-hand content page of many of our tabs. But at the top, you have the Maryland State Data Center website, and you can access a lot of recent data from there. Next slide, please. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Krishna. I encourage everybody to check out the resources that the State Data Center puts together. They're comprehensive, thorough, and frequently updated.